Welcome back to Gotcha Interact. Today we're going to be going through another pre-release talking about another new character in 5.0, Mualani, a Hydro Catalyst user. Now talking about Mualani, let's go ahead and talk about her normal attack, her skill, her burst. We'll talk about some passives, then kind of give our ideas on what's going on and what we think is going to happen, and maybe some ideas on how to use her in the coming version. Looking at her normal attack, it's nothing special. You know, she's going to do her normal attacks that are going to deal hydro damage, and those are going to be based off of, obviously, Catalyst, so those are always going to be dealing hydro damage. She's got a charge attack and a punching attack. Nothing's really special about these. But the skill is where it comes in handy. Looking at the skill, it states that after using her skill, Mualani will gain 60 Night Soul points and enter the Night Soul's Blessing state. While in her Night Soul Blessing, she will continuously consume Night Soul points. When they are depleted or when the skill is used again, Mualani's Night Soul's Blessing will end, and the state itself has the following traits. She will mount the Sharky Surfboard, increasing her movement speed. Mualani can move on water and in liquid phlogiston while this state is active, and she will take no damage from the latter state. Normal attacks will be converted to Sharky's Bites, dealing hydro damage based on Mualani's max HP, with the Night Soul attribute. Sharky's Bites can take place in midair as well. Damage dealt this way is considered normal attack damage. When she makes contact with opponents in this state, Mualani applies the Marked as Prey effect to them and gains 1 wave momentum stack, and she can get a max of 3 stacks. Each stack can be gained every 0.8 seconds per opponent. Looking at wave momentum, when Mualani uses Sharky's Bite, her damage dealt increases based on wave momentum stacks. When she has 3 stacks, a normal attack will use Sharky's Surging Bite instead, further increasing her damage and cancelling out all the stacks thereafter. Looking at Marked as Prey, when Shark Bite hits an opponent with Marked as Prey, that mark is then removed, and then she will fire Shark Missiles at up to 5 nearby opponents as Marked as Prey, dealing damage to them equal to this Sharky's Bite instance and clearing their marks. If more than one opponent is the target of Sharky's Bite and the Shark Missiles, the damage dealt will decrease, with 28% being the maximum decrease when at least 3 opponents are targeted.
Looking at Mualani's burst, this is called Storm Burst Shot. Basically, Mualani's just going to fire a Super Shark missile that can track opponents, and it's going to deal AoE hydro damage based on Mualani's max HP. And then quickly looking at her passives, her first one is called Heat Resistant Freshwater Floater. This states that when Sharky's Surging Bite hits an opponent, it will generate a floater nearby. Mualani will restore 22 Night Soul points when she picks up a floater she has created. Only one such floater can be created in this way during a single use of Night Soul's Blessing.
The second passive talent is Natlan's Greatest Guide. It states that when a nearby party member triggers a Night Soul burst, Mualani will gain 1 stack of Wave Chaser's exploits, which lasts for 20 seconds, with a max of 3 stacks. When she uses Storm Burst Shot, which is her burst, Mualani will clear all such stacks and increase the damage of this Storm Burst Shot by 20, 30, and 40% of her max HP. Like Kinich, the other character we talked about last time in our other pre-release, talking about this character though, it's similar with their third passive talents. We're not really going to get into them considering they're not combat focused. Looking overall at what Mualani can actually do, now let's get into the nitty gritty. I guess, Rift, what are your thoughts about the character overall? We've read the kits now. What are your thoughts about the character overall?
I think, and for a lot of people, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is, well, with a new Hydro DPS being added to the roster, at this point, it does, there's definitely a lot of them. We have Child was one of the very first ones in a limited 5-star, and then eventually we got Ayato, and then we have Neuvillette. There was also Kokomi in Inazuma. So there's a lot of Hydro damage dealers just in the roster. And so now here they are adding yet another one. And so I guess the biggest question for a lot of people would be, is Mualani gonna be enough to power creep essentially one of the best characters in Genshin Impact? And that is Neuvillette. And honestly, I don't know, just because Neuvillette is so insanely powerful and crazy, just the AoE potential and the damage on top of that. I mean, it's really hard to get past that. I mean, even Arlecchino, if anything, she's just on par. It's very hard to argue that she's actually better. And some people will say that. So with Mualani, I don't know if she will be better than Neuvillette, just because it's obviously a different kit. I feel like it's more like, she might be more comparable to Ayato or Child, but still much more powerful just because it is a Natlan character. There's going to be new mechanics. I think she will probably, if anything, be on the same level as Neuvillette at best. I don't think she would be better. It's just, for me, it's just hard to, see a character actually being better than Neuvillette. I think she'll just be on the same level. And I think that's, that's gonna be a good thing, especially for newer players who maybe don't have Neuvillette. Well, they could look at Mualani, and even if you already have Neuvillette, Mualani could still be a good, okay pull for your account. if you want a Hydro DPS that's also not Neuvillette, just because, I mean, if you have Neuvillette, you should probably be focusing on getting Farina eventually, and even if you don't, you should be focusing on getting Farina, because Farina is just an insanely powerful character, kind of a universal pull no matter what your account looks like, so a very high must pull value. At the end of the day, if you already have a Hydro DPS, you can safely skip. If you don't, then Mualani is obviously going to add a major, role to your account in having a Hydro DPS. And Hydro is one of the best elements in the game, just because of all the different reactions that it is involved in, and naturally because of that, all the teams it's involved in. It's one of the main things you want in a lot of Dendro teams, because you need it to start to getting into Burgeon and Hyper Bloom. It's got really good damage when you do a Vaporized team. There's just a lot of things going for Hydro. So I think Mualani is going to naturally just have a lot of different team options that you can do with her. Basically anywhere you would use Ayato or Child, Kokomi, or even Neuvillette, she's basically going to fill in any of the slots, in my opinion, and work out just fine, especially because you're using the skill, and going into it somewhat of a normal attack state. Kind of reminds me of Ayato just a little bit, but she still is very unique in and of herself.
So I'm glad we actually always have this kind of idea between, Vixen and Rift, always having these two different we can have very similar opinions, and we usually do, but I do like it every once in a while when we kind of have differing opinions. She got a nerf actually pretty recently in the next version of the actual thing. I think she was just hitting too hard. I do think her numbers before were, on par with what you were probably going to be able to see in a Neuvillette team. The previous nerf, though, or the recent nerf, I should say, I think definitely knocks her down a peg or two. Never mind the idea that, she's specifically kind of very boss focused. If you look at, obviously looking at her skill, that whole idea of if she's basically, if more than one opponent is targeted by those Sharky's bites and those missiles, then you're going to have a damage, decrease with a maximum of 3 opponents. Then that's going to be decreasing with a maximum of 28% or whatever of the maximum decrease that you can get of the damage. Especially with the nerf, and then with a lot of players, especially with the Abyss and whatever, we're seeing more waves of enemies, or even just multiple enemies at one time. We're not really getting the consistent one boss abysses. And even for the Imaginarium Theater, it's very similar. You're usually getting multiple enemies. It's not just a one shot of a huge boss. And so in my personal opinion, I think Mualani is going to be a lot of hype. And I think, a lot of the characters in Outland are going to be very hyped. But it's going to be the kind of the same thing with like Cyno and Sumeru, right? Cyno was extremely good when he first came out. And over time, and especially when the Nilou Bloom team came out, then Alhaitham later on, he kind of just got swept under the rug of kind of being, quote, at the top echelon of the game. I'm not saying he's a bad character, but, he just kind of got placed a little bit lower than people's expectations when his full team started to flesh out compared to some other characters. And then over time, obviously that fell even lower. 3.0 characters or 4.0 characters, 5.0 characters tend to do extremely well in the beginning, but seem to be power crept pretty easily. So I would just keep my eyes peeled if I were you guys, just looking at what these characters can do. I do think Mualani is going to be a fun character, but in my personal opinion, if I'm being honest with you guys, I do think that with everything she has, she seems more boss focused. One huge boss enemy, and that's going to be it. Going for that huge damage hit. But I do think that she can do, decent damage against multiple enemies, because I know it'll be kind of spread out, but I would just caution to the wind. Now, we have multiple versions before the actual character is released, and I could be proven wrong easily and immediately, and I could even be wrong now. Those are just my personal opinions on what Mualani is going to bring to the table. Besides that, though, I think she has a really cool playstyle, even giving back some of her Night Soul points. I do like how kind of one character, Kinich, starts out with, no amount of Night Soul points, and his whole kit is to, constantly get up to the 20 Night Soul points to then do a big damage hit, whereas Mualani is the opposite. She starts out with a maximum of her 60, and then she's just decreasing over time. So it's kind of cool how they're kind of going in different directions. So I do like that there is kind of a difference, even though they use the same things. It shows a lot of interest, at least for me, to what we're going to see in Natlan.
Yeah, the more I think about her kit and just the playstyle that's playing out in my head, before seeing any footage, of course, the more I just think she kind of feels like a Wanderer meets Ayato. If you want to go out on a limb with me in your imagination, just because of Wanderer having that mechanic of the Kuuger Yoku points. You use a skill, and then you can just do your flying around, use your normals, charge, whatever, until that runs out. I feel like that's what Mualani is going to kind of sort of also feel like at least maybe in a similar way, just because she's starting out, like you said, with 60 Night Soul stacks, and then it's just decreasing. So it kind of feels like that. And, you know, again, I bring up Ayato because, well, they're both Hydra DPSs, and they're both kind of using their normal attacks as their damage. So I just feel like she feels like a mobile version of Ayato. I don't know, just the Ayato Wanderer kind of meshed into one character, into a Hydra DPS. And after you talked about, you know, she does less damage if she's actually targeting more enemies as opposed to just one, I think that's a good point to bring up. And the reason I think it's a good point to bring up, it's probably just to keep her from being too powerful, if I'm being honest. Like I said earlier on in the video, she's not going to take over Neuvillette, in my opinion. It's just, that's asking for a lot because Neuvillette's just utterly broken. So I'm feeling kind of Ayato level of damage, maybe a little bit better just because it's a lot later of a character. But that's just kind of where I'm thinking. So in terms of like tier listing, better than Ayato, worse than Neuvillette, you know, somewhere right in the middle, maybe at the top of A tier at best, but definitely not like an S tier unit. And of course, guys, this can change with time. There still is a lot of time before she comes out, and, you know, therefore a lot of changes being in the kit. She could get better. She could also just get worse. It just really depends on what she looks like upon release.
Well, that's everything we've got talking about Mualani. If you guys do have your own personal opinions and you guys think that we are absolutely wrong and so far from the truth, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. And if you guys do agree with us, also go ahead and put that in the comments as well. Thank you guys for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.